Brad, what's going on, man? Welcome to the Dad Edge, my friend.
Hey, Larry, thanks, man. Appreciate it. I'm so glad to be here.
I'm excited to have you. This is one of what we call the five dimensions in our community. Leadership, fatherhood, marriage, health, finances. So finances, and I just heard a statistic as well not too long ago that 50% of divorces are over financial disagreements and lack of aligning the vision and that kind of thing. Is that correct? Do you know any
Yeah.
statistics like that? Yeah, is that correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. It's been known to be, it kind of flips with a couple of other ones, but yeah, it's been in the top three reasons for divorce in the United States for some time. Money fights and money arguments. And it's
Mm.
not uncommon for me to have, couples come or a person from a relationship come and say, we're really struggling. Like I'm doing everything I can to get my spouse or partner on board with this. And um I'm not having success with that. And sometimes, that's a money issue, and other times that's more of a relationship issue. It's not always just a money issue there. There could be some things going on in the relationship that's causing that other person not to want to do it. But yeah, I mean, it is definitely something that a lot of couples do struggle with.
You and I were talking before we hit record today that the majority of your followers, even though you're debt-free dad, that's the name of your organization, are women.
Yeah. And that's
Tell me about that.
fascinating. Yeah, that's fascinating to me. We don't necessarily create content towards either gender. We just create content, but for some reason, a lot of all of our social media content is more directed towards women, even our members. The majority of them are women. And what we're finding is that when we're working with these individuals, we find that in relationships, and at least in our experience, is that more women are now stepping up and taking control of the financial responsibilities in the home versus, say, the men. And what I find too is that men are more taking more of a sidecar. They may be involved, but in a lot of cases, many of them aren't really involved, and it's really up to the female in the relationship to make all the decisions and to do all of those things. And it is like on TikTok. We started to grow our audience on TikTok over the last 18 months or so, and if we look at our algorithm, and again, we don't direct it, it's mostly goes to the female side. And I think, they are looking, and if you look at statistics, most females say that money is a big stressor for them. It is something that, they need to have under control because it brings security into their lives, into their households. And for men, they don't necessarily need so much of that. So that might be part of the reason as well. Also, for men versus females, men I think tend to look at more of like their salary as a scoreboard. If I make a good salary, that means I'm really doing well for my family. But we got to take a step back and say, like, well, how well are we managing that salary? How well are we managing that money that we're actually bringing in?
Mhm. I have an interesting situation. I'd love to get your opinion on it. And it's just something that I've noticed works well for my wife and I. So I'm in charge of the budget. My wife is in charge of cash flow slash paying bills, and cash flow meaning like she pays the bills. So I
Yeah.
budget the money, I make the money, and then we communicate every single Sunday about things that were spent the week before, things we have coming up, the week coming up, as well as next 2 weeks, next month, or whatever. So we always kind of keep our eyes on exactly where that money is going, where it needs to go, and that kind of thing. I find that I got to be honest, I hate paying bills. Hate it
Yeah.
with a passion.
Yeah.
Like I literally loathe paying bills. But here's the funny thing. I actually don't mind budgeting. I actually don't mind being like somewhat the one who's in charge of the planning of it, or at least one thing I've realized too is that I might plan for certain categories, but then I'll talk to my wife and she's like, "Hey, we actually need to put a little bit more this month into the kids sports because we got to sign up Mason for football, Colton's starting hockey." She's like, "But and we don't need nearly as much clothing because we just went shopping not too long ago. Everybody's got clothes and shoes that fit right now, so we can like reallocate." But I have, and here's the funny thing too. One other interesting dynamic in our relationship is my wife hates investing, like doesn't understand it,
Yeah.
doesn't want to understand it. And she's
Right.
just like, just let me know that we're growing our money by 8 to 12% every year, and if we are losing, what we're doing about it. Other than that, like, I just don't even want to know. Like, it's too in the weeds for me. I love that stuff. So I handle all the investing, I handle the budgeting, but she then handles paying the actual bills. And I would also say, I'm gonna whisper this, but she's also in charge of spending about 85% of the money too.
Which I would say is pretty normal. No, I love that. I think the key that you said there and all that, Larry, is that you guys talk about it. You're having conversations about it, and I think that's one of the number one things that I think is lacking in most relationships, that a lot of the money conversations revolve around how are we going to manage this crisis now? How are we going to manage
Yeah,
this bill that we can't pay? Let me tell you, those conversations don't go very well. But conversations like yours, hey, how are we doing 12 to 18%? Are we making extra? Those are fun because you're actually going on the offensive with your money. But most people who are living paycheck to paycheck, which is nearly 7 out of 10 households right now, their relationship with money and their conversations around money are mostly all negative. So, you really got to work hard at flipping that script. And like you said, having things like the big bad B word, which is the budget, right? And I think you also have determined, like, a really good thing in a relationship is to determine, like, what are the strengths and weaknesses and the interests of each person in the relationship,
yeah.
because
Oh my
you're
God,
right,
yeah.
you love budgeting, and I think that's great, and she don't mind paying the bills. I think that's great. She hates investing, but you like it. Like, I think you look at each spouse and partner and say who has the strengths to do some of this stuff, and divide and conquer. And I think, it's not necessarily like we have to do everything together, but I think we have to communicate the plan together and then to talk about who's responsible for implementing that plan. And, I think you guys are blowing it out of the park right now.
Oh, well, listen, it hasn't come without the cost of a really in your pie in your face education. So like my wife and I were literally just talking about this with my two older boys, my 16, 18-year-old, because we're having a lot of money conversations with them right now, just around like money management and budgeting and their own investing and that kind of thing. And my wife was like, yeah, when me and your dad first got married, it was disastrous. And they're like,
Yeah.
how so? And so here's what I did. I basically took all ownership of making the majority of the money, budgeting and paying bills. And what I found is because I just have like this, I think this emotional, which everybody does. Everybody's got an emotional story with money, like how you grew up and that kind of thing. And I
Sure.
grew up, I'll never forget, man, being 15 years old and I came home from school one day to find that all of our furniture was gone and my mom was sitting on our family room floor crying and
Oh,
not and being like, I don't know how we're gonna pay the mortgage, like I don't know how we're gonna pay for groceries. Basically what happened was she had this live-in boyfriend. He lived there for 2 years. She actually worked for his company. He moved in all of his furniture. She sold all of hers. He lived with us for a couple years. The relationship went absolutely disastrous. His company went under. My mom lost her job and he just left and left with all of his stuff. And
oh,
I was like, dude, I will never forget that. That was like 30 years ago. And I'm like, that's like burned into my brain. So like when I first graduated college, neither my wife and I came from money at all.
yeah, yeah,
And she had to work for like every dollar she had, same as me. We had a lot of college debt. So we had between the two of us, I mean, it's all relative. I mean, it was 60 grand between the two of us that we owed for student loans. And then, we lived the American dream. We bought a brand new $25,000 car back in 2003 when we first got
yeah,
married. And suddenly it's like, holy crap, we're like $85,000 in debt and we haven't even gotten started yet. So
yeah.
I read the Dave Ramsey book
Oh,
back
yeah,
in 2003, and I'm like, debt snowball. I'm doing the baby steps. So like literally what I did was, and I thought this was a good idea. You might find this very, very humorous. So I went out and I'm like, I am going to pay off all $80,000 in like 4 years. And I did. Not knowing though, my wife, here's the story. My wife was like, your dad was so reckless with money, but not to the point where he was buying anything, but to the point where he was paying off debt. Like he was literally writing four, five, $6,000 checks. And then on Friday, I'd be like, hey, I'm going to the grocery store. How much money do we have in checking account? And I'd be like, oh, we have like $98. And she's like, wait, we need diapers. Like you just $98, like Larry, that's not going to buy anything. Like she would lose her mind. She
yeah,
said that the straw that broke camel's back was when we were taking our two oldest, who were, I think, I don't know, 4 and 2 at the time or something like that, to Florida. And my wife was like, hey, we're going to Florida. How much do we have set aside for Florida? And I'm like, why would we have money set aside for like, I'm an idiot. Okay. I'm like, why would we have money set aside for Florida? She's like, because we're going to Florida. And I was like, oh, I just paid off the last remaining balance for the one loan over here. And she's like, but we have no money to go to Florida. So at that point, I was like, maybe this is not my strength. Maybe you should pay the bills. And when she's like, yeah, I will do that. Let me pay the bills, please. Because to me, she's like, it's more of a game of chess
Yeah.
than you like throwing everything at it at once. So like that was our relationship the first 5 years.
Yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
don't think that's uncommon though. I think when you get two people together, both with a different financial history on how they were raised with money, and even if, they got out of school and were early adults with money, they had their own experiences with it. And now you're going to mash those two together. It takes time. It takes a lot of trial and error. And it
Yeah.
also takes being intentional with it, and I think that's where a lot of couples lack is that they don't want to have that proactive approach to it. It just becomes something that's more of a thorn in their side and they just kind of
Right.
wing it all the time. And
Right.
eventually it just becomes like this really big thorn that's really causing a lot of issues.
It is. And, reading your bio, like in my personal opinion, like I've only known you for like 15 minutes, but I got to tell you, man, Brett, you come across to me as like just a genuine, like real dude who really understands the ebbs and flows and the pain points of what people go through. I mean, I know in 2012, you guys lost your home in foreclosure. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. My first marriage ended. And
Yeah.
a big part of that was because of money. There was some other reasons, obviously, but yeah, we ended up we sold a fixer upper house that we bought in 2008, and we bought this brand new house in 2008, and just right when that whole housing bubble and thing was starting to happen, and things were starting to unravel very quickly. And we bought in 2008, so we bought high. And then in 2011, 2012, obviously our home, we owed more than what our home was worth, which today people are like, that happened. Yeah, right, with the way real estate is today. But yeah, neither one of us could afford the mortgage getting a divorce, so we ended up having to let it go to foreclosure. And for me, that was like an very eye-opening experience of, I have really built a financial house of cards, so to speak. And all it took was just one card to make the whole house, fall down. I had a 2-year-old son. My oldest son, Noah, was 2 at the time. And that was like kind of my financial wake-up call, so to speak. I never wanted to feel like that again. Foreclosure is a very public thing. They put that stuff, and I know most people don't really read newspapers anymore. Some people don't, but they put that stuff in the newspaper, and it's very public knowledge. And I was very embarrassed. My ego took a huge blow, and here I am, broadcasting this life that I had it all figured out. And we looked good, but man, we were broke, and that's how sadly most people live today. And yeah, so that was kind of the thing. It was, I think one of the things, if you're looking to get out of debt, you have to have a deep rooted need or desire to change. Like if you just want to get out of debt for the sake of getting out of debt, that's not going to be enough, because getting out of debt, going against popular society and consumerism and how most people manage their money, it's hard to go against, or go against the grain, right? So for me, it was like, I want to be better for my son. I need to do better, because here I am in my early 30s. I've always told myself the more money I make, the better I'll get with my money, which was a joke. It just lifestyle creep keeps coming up. And so that was a driving factor for me. And number two was, I didn't want to work for somebody the rest of my life. At that time, I didn't really know exactly what kind of business I wanted to open, but I knew one of the roadblocks to me ever being able to achieve that dream was my finances. Like, there's no way I could ever step away from my salary in order to start a business, because I just didn't have any money. And so that was a driving factor for me too. And I was like, okay, these are the two reasons why I want to do this. And once I had those, getting out of debt became I wouldn't say easy, but it became easier, because I was willing to give up on some things. I was willing to sacrifice some things, because I had felt the pain of failure. And I never wanted to feel that again. I never wanted to put myself in that situation, my kid in that situation. And I really wanted to build a better financial foundation for us. And it took me about 4 or 5 years. And I tell people, it's like, look, they ask, how did you get out of debt? And I failed. I failed and failed and failed and failed and failed. I'd start and I'd screw up. I'd do a budget, I'd screw up. I'd build an emergency fund savings and have some money, and then I would let my emotional spending wreak havoc, and I would use that. And I just kind of learned and failed and my way out. And eventually I just got there after 4 or 5 years. And I've been debt free now for 11 plus years outside of my mortgage, which I just took on about 3 years ago. And I got to tell you, it's been some of the best work that I've done in my entire life because it's served me so well in the good times in life, but also in some really, really bad times as well.
Yeah, and reading your bio, you're not a stranger to some really tough times. I know you lost your wife last year.
Yeah.
Uh, your daughter Avery, she was born with some complications, and I know part of your story is that while those things are absolutely horrific, right? It's absolute nightmare. But to have, you mentioned your finances were like a house of cards, but having that part of your life that's a solid foundation, of some sort, like at least where we can get strength somewhere, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I know for you that this has not been an easy road, but I would love for you to I would love for you to just share whatever is on your heart about
Yeah.
those situations if you'd like, and if you
Yeah.
don't, like I totally get that too.
Yeah, so I'm a little over 5 years ago. My wife, my second wife Sarah, at the time had given birth to our daughter Avery, which was kind of a big surprise to begin with because my wife Sarah was told that she would never have kids. In fact, at her last OB appointment, they had told us like now's the time to look into fertility because you guys are at the age of like it's now or never, right? And we kind of looked at each other. We're like, good, if we're not meant to have any more, naturally, we're good with that. And 3 months later, she was pregnant. It's crazy. So that whole thing is just crazy in itself. Was like wrapping our head around this idea that we're having another kid because we were literally told by everybody it's never going to happen. And here we are, and it's happening. And my wife had a perfectly healthy pregnancy, no issues, no complications. Until the very last day, they noticed that her blood pressure spiked a little bit, so they decided at her age we're just going to take you and induce you, and get you started. And that was only one day before she was technically due to deliver Avery. And unfortunately, during birth, Avery was born with the umbilical cord wrapped around her neck, and she had lost oxygen during birth at some point. Now, looking at medical records, they can't determine or look at and find out when that happened because nothing ever showed up. But sadly, in the first about 24 hours of her life, she experienced about 24 to 30 seizures, which indicated some brain injury of some sort. And it took about 4 days for them to finally get her stable enough to actually do an MRI. And once they did the MRI, they determined that she had suffered some pretty significant right brain damage and also some left brain damage as well. And I'll never forget, they sat us down in this room and they said, your daughter's never going to have a normal life. She will never go to a normal school. She will never play sports. She will never dance. She will likely be in a wheelchair. She may need food feeding tubes. She likely may never even make it out of this hospital. And we were devastated as parents because you go from, these are happy times, like this is going to be a great thing, complete miracle that this is happening, to 4 days later finding out your life has now completely turned upside down. They gave us about 6 weeks in the NICU. Avery made it out in 9 days, which speaks to her willpower. Like, you ain't going to tell me what I'm going to do, right? She was out in 9 days, and we started physical therapy, OT therapy, and all that stuff right away with her. Again, we had more doctor's appointments where they determined, like, you guys just are going to have to face the reality. Like, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough for her. It's going to be tough for you guys. And we continue to press forward. I really feel because of where we were financially, because we were debt free, because I ran my own business from home, we were able to really take a lot of time and effort and energy and put it into her and her care and everything that she needed because we didn't send her to daycare. We didn't say, not that there's anything wrong with that, but for someone like this, like we really wanted to be there. So when the OT therapists and the PT therapists are saying, hey, like these are the things like you guys need to work with her on, we were doing that every day, countless times throughout the day, day after day, and I feel like that was a tremendous opportunity for us as parents to really give her the best opportunity to live a normal life. And because again, we didn't have a lot of debt. We didn't have any debt. We were debt free. We were renting at the time. We had really low rent. We kept our lifestyle really minimum. We were able to pour all that energy and effort. I was able to take a step back from my business. Sarah was able to take a step back from her business for a time. Like we didn't have to focus on money. We didn't have to stress about money because we took care of all that before this happened. And I really contribute a lot of that to where she is today. And the good news is where she is today is Avery is in a normal 4K classroom today, and she is doing great. She obviously has some challenges with. She was diagnosed with CP. She has some CP, mostly in her left hand, that we are working with her on therapy, and she does have a speech delay. And they did tell us that she would likely have one because, as children and as their brains develop, they can only overcome so much. And so some things are going to be delayed, and they said speech is going to be one of those. But outside of that, she is exactly where she needs to be. And she is your typical 5-year-old little girl. And she is a feisty one, I'll tell you that. But she's doing great.
Wow, man. What a blessing that you guys were able to have that flexibility that you really needed at that point in your life.
Yeah.
And you're right, there isn't a whole lot of people that have like that same luxury, but you also you prepared for it. You worked hard for it. I know getting out of debt was no easy task. You know, it was relentless, and I'm sure it was definitely difficult. Do you mind me asking, how much debt were you guys under, and how much were you able to pay off?
Yeah, this is a we estimate again because I never, I mentioned Larry, I wanted to open my own business. I never anticipated it was going to be this, right? So when I was getting out of debt, I never really thought to total everything up and really keep track. And in fact, those are the things that we now teach because they're so important. But we estimate that we paid off about $45,000 of debt in about 4 or 5 years. And at the time, I was making about $45,000 a year. So, and again, that was back in 2012, 13, 14. Yeah, somewhere right in there.
What was your job back then?
So I worked in the sign industry for about 15 years before I started this business. I went to school for graphic design, got into the sign industry back in the early 2000s, and really really enjoyed the sign industry. It's a lot of fun. Different projects every single day, so it kept things exciting. But then I got this crazy idea to get out of debt, and this was one thing, Larry, I wasn't expecting. But as I was getting out of debt and kind of sharing with my friends, family, coworkers, like, hey, like I was really struggling. I'm doing much better now. Like I don't feel stressed. Like I'm sleeping better. I actually have money. It's crazy. And people like kind of started coming out of the woodwork and saying, "What are you doing?" Because I have credit card debt. I've got student loans. My wife and I, we're not getting along with money. Like, what are some of the things that you guys were working on? And I kind of on accident started doing this. And I just started helping people on the side saying, like, these are the things that I was doing. And they would come back to me and say, Brad, this really worked. Like, we're doing good now. Like, we're going to keep going. And that felt good. Like, I love helping people. It wasn't necessarily the money thing I was so much interested, but I really gained a passion for helping people really transform their lives from a financial standpoint because it has this ripple effect on everything. And so that's how I kind of got into this. And back in 2015, I decided to open up an LLC. We originally called this business Balanced Sense Financial Coaching, which much later became Debt Free Dad. But in 2016, I opened a membership program because I originally started doing one-on-one coaching with individuals. But I soon found out that that was going to be very limited for me as far as, and especially very schedule intense. Like my whole day was going to be doing one-on-one coaching calls. And I wanted to create a business that had more time freedom in it, freedom to take my kids to school, freedom to pick them up, go to sporting events, like make sure that I was going to be present in their lives. So I went more of the membership route where I could say, hey, I can teach this stuff on a much larger level, charge a much, much more economical price for a lot of these people to get the help. And now we have nearly 500 members. We've helped thousands of people over the years save and pay off tens of millions of dollars through Roots. And we've been doing this now 9 years. And I went full time about 8 years ago. And I mean, we got members, Larry, in Australia. I got members that joined in from Greece, from the UK, from Canada. I was like, I'm just Brad. Like you said, I'm just a normal. I'm Brad from little old southeastern Wisconsin. My goal was just to help a few people out here in just my own town. Like here we are across the United States now, even with in the world, and with our podcast, it's been even greater. It's just been a lot of fun. I almost have to pinch myself at times and like, this is really what I do, and this is how many people we've helped. It's crazy to think that.
That's so cool, man. And good for you. You know, I this is a true need out there, and I think you know this more than anybody. I think a lot of people have no idea exactly where to start. Or
Yeah.
I just read. Are you familiar with Dr. John Deloney?
No. Mm-mm.
Okay, so Dr. John Deloney, he's one of the guys who's taken over for Dave Ramsey at Ramsey Solutions.
Okay. Yep.
He just wrote a book, and I just interviewed him last week on building an anxious free life. and he talks about what he calls the 6 decisions every day. Decide to blank, decide to blank. And one of them is decide to become more financially debt free. Just just be debt free, right? And he goes into this chapter because he's a psychologist by training, but in the chapter where he talks about, choose financial viability, it's all about your body actually knows when it's not safe. Like, and it doesn't allow the mind to really shut off. So like the whole thing with you talking about like, oh, I'm suddenly sleeping better. There's actually in the chapter of his book, he talks about that when you don't actually feel safe, whether it's you're not connected to other people, you maybe there's a hardship on the horizon, or maybe it's your health, or maybe it's finances in some way, shape, or form, your body is keeping score, and it knows when it's not safe. So it's going to keep you awake if it doesn't feel safe. So it doesn't surprise me, especially after reading that book, that you're sleeping better at night, when you go debt free, because suddenly you're like, man, I feel like I can kind of breathe a little bit. Now, granted, there's a lot of other areas in my life, right? There's my relationships, there's my health, there's
Right.
my job, there's everything else. But finances is one of these levers that we can absolutely pull to reduce our stress. I'm curious, $45,000. I don't even know what the average is out there of what people are facing with debt. But I would love for you to share with us how you went about doing this. And it sounds like you took 4 or 5 years, which to me sounds like it was you weren't doing what I was doing, which was super reckless. And let me just pay it off all at once if I can.
Right.
But you were very strategic about it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think again, going back to what I originally said, I think the big thing that drove me was just getting that deep rooted why or desire on why I wanted to do it. Like you really have got to find some meaning to it because it's a lot of work. I think getting out of debt was probably the hardest thing I've ever done because I mean, our whole society is driven around debt and payments and consumerism and you only live once lifestyle. And, it's so easy just to kind of live that way and just kind of follow the herd there. So you really have to find something that really drives you. And I think for me, it was, again, my son and wanting to start a business and just build a better financial foundation. The other thing too I lacked in my life is just really good, solid short-term and long-term goals. What is it that I really wanted? And I can, man, I wish I would have brought it out for today's conversation, but I still have the original journal that I had started writing in back when I was getting out of debt. And it had all of the things that I wanted to have in a career, in a life. And amazingly now, Larry, I have the majority of them, which is crazy. I go back and I look at that, but I had never done that up to that point. And I would look at that journal all the time as a reminder. This is why I'm doing that work. This is why I'm doing these things. This is why I'm saying no to myself. This is why I'm willing to make these short-term sacrifices so I can have this, and I think that is so important. Like if you're someone who struggles with a lot of impulsive and wasteful spending, which a lot of us do, Shopify has a statistic that 40 to 80% of all of our purchases are made on impulse or emotion. I think a big way on
Really?
how you can, yeah, it's crazy.
I mean,
The average,
that makes sense.
yeah, the average American will spend upwards of $300,000 in their lifetime on just emotional spending, which is an immense amount of money for most of us, right? And so I think for a lot of us, just really having that why, that desire, those short-term and long-term goals, something bigger that you're working towards, it's not going to take care of all of the emotional spending because even today I still emotionally spend. It happens. We're human, but it'll take care of a lot of it. And it's much easier to tell yourself no because, hey, I'm working towards like this really cool thing over here I want. But without that, man, marketing is just too good at getting us to spend money that we didn't plan on spending. And they're really good at getting us to spend money we don't have by going into debt for things that we don't need necessarily, too. So you really need to have this kind of stuff in your financial life in order to kind of have the blinders up and kind of stay away from these distractions or shiny objects or squirrels that are out there that are causing us to spend money that we don't want. So, once I did those two things, that was huge and really giving me the vision and the focus of, okay, now that I have this, now I'm willing to do the things that I need to do, which is more of like the technical side of things. So for instance, like budgeting, starting and regularly doing a consistent monthly budget was huge. One of the reasons why a lot of people don't budget is because, they feel like it's too constricting or they feel like sometimes it's only for broke people. Even if you look at marketing, when budget is associated in any sort of marketing, it typically means cheap, right? And a lot of us have just this negative mindset on budgeting. A budget is just literally a plan for your income and your expenses. That's it, no matter what they are. Even if you don't have any debt, I still have a budget. And that shocks people sometimes. They're like, you still have a budget, even though you're debt free. I'm just like, well, how do you think I stay here? Right. I still got to plan the money that I'm making and what I'm doing with it. So a budget is a huge part of it. I think the other thing too that really made a difference for me was really creating a habit of saving in my life. I was a terrible saver all the way, my entire life. I mean, even when I go back to my teens, when I made money, my teenage years, my 20s into my early 30s, like I was awful at saving. I never saved any money. And of course, when you don't create a habit of saving, the only thing you're always relying on is debt. Like if you want something, you're taking out the payments. And yet we figure out we're trying to like, why can't I ever get out of debt? Well, you have to be able to start learning how to save and understand the importance of saving. It's what is that old saying? It's save money today so money can save you tomorrow. And that's my life, Larry, over these past, 5, 6 years, losing my spouse and having my daughter go through all these things without an emergency fund savings and having a plan and a budget and all these things. Like it would have been disaster. It would have been much worse situation than it had to be. But because we were intentional, it was a little bit easier to handle and go through some of that stuff.
So the word budget, do you find that most people, they just have a reaction just to that word in general? It's kind of like diet.
Yeah, it's a swear word for a lot of people.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, it's a negative thing. It's a negative thing because we immediately think I I can't live. I can't go out and spend money. I can't go out to eat. I can't go out and get coffee. I can't go golf. I'm not gonna be able to do anything if I have a budget. And that's really not what it is. A budget is just giving yourself permission to do the things that you want. That's all it is. The sad reality, though, for a lot of people who are living paycheck to paycheck is the budget really does show them that a lot of them are living a life that they can't afford. And that's the scary part. But it's only scary for a little while because, again, you don't have to sacrifice everything. Like people who go through, roots or people that I coach one on one and help out, it's like, look, you're only having to make short term sacrifices. Everything that you have to get rid of right now to get out of debt is temporary. You can get it back when you're out. You can have all the things when you're out. It's not you have to get rid of it for the rest of your life. It's just and you have to decide that for your own life. What are the short-term sacrifices that you're willing to give up? Not what Brad's willing to give up or what Larry's willing to give up, but it's what you're willing to give up and not having your life in order to get out of debt. And for everyone, that's going to look a little bit different. It's not right or wrong. It's just yours. But nothing changes unless something changes. It's like the old days, when they threw the logs down the river, Larry, and, the log jam would happen. And what did they do? They threw dynamite in the middle of the river to get the logs released so the logs would flow down the river. And this is all the logging days, right? It's the same thing when it comes to your finances. Like you have to throw a stick of dynamite in there and make things move. And sometimes that means we have to give up things. Sometimes that might mean we have to look for income producing activities to make a little bit more money to bring more cash flow in. But you really have got to be committed to we've got to make some changes if we want to start actually seeing some changes with our life.
I agree. And I think that that's really important for people to really remind themselves of like, well, just because I can't have this right now, that doesn't mean I can't have it ever.
Right.
Right. I'm going to trade some peace of mind for this other thing that I think I need that quite frankly, I probably don't.
Yeah.
Right. What do you find is are the things that are hardest for people to give up?
Cars.
Yeah.
Their
I bet.
cars. It's
Yeah.
probably the biggest thing. Going out to eat is probably the area. And again, if you haven't, I'd try and maybe we'll give this tip in a little bit, Larry. But go back and look at your expenses and see how much you're going out to eat. But going out to eat is probably the number one budget buster, um, across the board. I mean, high car payments are a big part of that too. I mean, right now the average car payment is well over. I think it's 700, right around $750 a month. And for most middle income to middle income or higher income earners, middle to higher income earners, and that's a huge amount of money going to a depreciating asset every single month. And it takes up too much income. So what ends up happening is sometimes, families will have one, maybe sometimes in a lot of cases, two of these. And, it basically suffocates their cash flow. They can't save. They can't really make progress in getting out of debt. Yeah, they got two great cars, but it's really hindering their ability to get ahead financially. So I would say cars, it was for me. That was a big one for me. In fact, one of the big sacrifices I gave up was a brand new car, had a $500 car payment at the time. And that made an immense difference in getting out of debt. I actually contribute that to be one of the major things that helped me get out of debt and really improve my cash flow, help me build more savings and be able to do things that I wanted to do. And I think still today, I'm still seeing it. In fact, car payments are one of the number one reasons why people aren't getting approved for mortgages. It, I have mortgage lenders tell me that all the time. People just have these crazy car payments and they can't get approved to buy, say, something that is an appreciating asset, which is a home. And, they're stuck in these cars.
Mm, wow. Yeah, that really doesn't surprise me. I mean, some of these car payments. I mean, like even if you look at a family like SUV, like if you look at a Yukon or something like that, I mean, like a Suburban. I mean, these things are crazy expensive now,
Yeah,
and
it's
yeah,
insane.
they are absolutely insane. The whole eating out thing too. I can definitely see that, especially we have four boys, and
Oh, yeah.
when we go out to eat, it's ridiculous. Like, and we don't even go to like these crazy places or anything like that. Like last night, we took my oldest out to eat. I mean, we took the whole family out to eat, but were celebrating a few things. So each kid like had like a really big week this past week. So my oldest, he was promoted to a leadership position in marching band for his senior year. So he's going to be what's called the drum major. So he's going to be in charge of the entire high school marching band, which was a super huge promotion for him.
Wow.
My 16-year-old just found out he's going to be the starting center for varsity football, which was huge. He's been working hard for that. My 10-year-old, his flag football team went undefeated and he's going to be in the finals next week. So that was big. And then my little guy made his first communion. So we had a lot to celebrate, and we went out to eat last night. We went to a nicer place. Normally, we have all the boys with us. We don't go to like a really nice place. We'll like hit up like Buffalo Wild Wings or something like that, or something where
Right.
we can get a lot of food for not a whole lot of money.
Yeah.
And last night we probably spent more on dinner than I mean we probably ever have. And it was a few $100s, and I was like, holy shit. Like I
Yeah.
was looking at the bill, and my oldest son was like, "Oh my god!" I was like, "Yeah, it was expensive." He's like, Are we be okay?" I was like, "Well, it's in the budget." I was like, "So this money is allotted." I was like, "But we're probably not going to go out to eat for the rest of the month. Yeah, we're gonna have
Right.
to eat at home for the rest of the month, just so you know,
Yeah.
because this
Yeah.
blew out the budget. So, or at
Right.
least like this is at the limit of the budget. So,
Yeah.
um, but it was cool because like I didn't like getting that bill at the end of the meal, but I also felt peace of mind of like we budgeted for this, so
Yeah.
I know we have it, and I also know that we're probably not going out to eat the rest of the month.
Yeah.
But at
But
least I know like the budget will give me the permission that I need. It'll give me the green light, the yellow light, or the red light on certain things that we're doing, right? And
yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, well, we just can't do that this month, or oh,
Yeah.
actually, yeah, we can, you know.
Yeah. But that's a two for a win there. And not only did you budget for it, but then, you had a teachable moment with, your kid about how to manage your money properly. Like,
Yeah,
are we gonna be okay? Well, yeah, we budgeted for it. We were intentional about this. Like, think about how different that is, how different that comes off to your kids. Like, oh, so it's okay to do this stuff. I just have to plan for it.
gotta
Whereas
plan for
opposed
it.
to, where more of a negative financial mindset is, well, this is really expensive. I don't know how we're going to pay our bills this month.
Right.
Now that child is, got some fear, right?
Yeah.
So I think, man, I think when it comes to kids, I think one of the best things, it's just look for the teachable moments of teaching your kids about this stuff too. I think there's so many different opportunities to it. It's not just sitting down and having a financial conversation with them. It's just how you live your life and go about your life and having those conversations in the moment. I love that. It's good.
What about grocery store like food? Like I just we
Oof.
eat healthy as a family,
Yeah.
and we've noticed we're just getting just clobbered when we go to the grocery store now. Like I'm looking at like our grocery bills and I'm like, oh my gosh. Like and I read another statistic. I don't know if it's true or not. It just popped up on my social media feed. So I don't know if this is true, but you might know that the average household is spent an average family of four is spending $11,000 more at the grocery store per year
Oof.
than what they were 2 years ago.
I have not seen that one. That's eye
Yeah.
opening though. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's eye opening.
It's like a
Man,
thousand
groceries.
extra dollars a month.
It is. I mean, and again, unfortunately, I don't have any like things that are just going to be earth shattering for people. It's going to change their grocery bill. But I think, because everyone's got, you know, different diets and different ways they spend money on groceries, I think. But what everything is going through, what everyone's going through right now with inflation and higher expenses, I think it sounds the alarm of like, we have to get our finances under control because there's going to be things outside of our control that are going to happen that are going to affect our household. There is, this idea that inflation has caused a ton of issues, and it has. But Larry, if you look at statistics, like there's an article, two articles. One was written, and I don't remember. I can source this and I can give it to you in the podcast notes if you want it. But in September of 2023, there was an article written where it said the average American can't handle. It's like 63%. 63% of the population cannot handle a $500 emergency expense without going into debt. And if you go through and read that article, it specifically blames inflation because of that. If you go back to 2017, article was written pre-COVID, pre-inflation. The statistic was exactly the same. 63% could not handle a $500 emergency expense without going into debt. So I look at that and I say, okay, well, if inflation is to blame, then what happened 7 years ago? What was the reason back then? And so I think that's where we need to be careful is finger pointing at everything outside of saying like, this is why I'm in debt and this is why I'll never get ahead. Because if we do, you're never giving yourself the opportunity to say, what can I do to start getting ahead? What are the things I can control? You can't control the grocery prices. You can't control how much gas is. You can't control all of those things, but you can control what's going on around your table, the conversations that you're having around money, the things that you're doing to make money, the way you're managing your money, preparation, because things aren't so good now, but who's to say they're not going to get worse? Like, what can we do now? Like, how do we stop some of the leaks that are going on in our life? And I think, I know that it's hard for a lot of people out there. I work with a lot of people that it's hard for, but there still are a lot of normal people who are kicking butt, Larry. I mean, I just had one of my members, a mom of 3 kids. Now she works a full-time job and she's also managing an auto shop with her partner full-time as well. They are working their butts off. They saved and paid off over nearly $10,000 just in the last 5 months with the way everything is right now. And they got 3 kids. I have Josh and Rachel who were just on my podcast back in February. In 5 months, they saved and paid off 16 grand. I've got Craig who works in computer development. And he said too, he's like, everything I tried over the years, nothing would work. Nothing would work. But he's like, I tried this. I started listening to the podcast. I tried doing the stuff that you guys were talking about. He saved and paid off $16,000 in 5 months. So it's like, we can use all these things as excuses because, and they are legitimate. They are making life hard. But if we let that win and say, well, there's no hope for us, we can't get ahead, you're stuck in the same spot. Whereas opposed to these individuals who are normal, hardworking individuals making normal incomes, they're saying, what can I do differently? And they're doing it and they're making progress and they're actually feeling much better about their financial life. So I think, it's easy to kind of get stuck in this rut of everything's bad. And especially depending on who you surround yourself with and all of that stuff. But it doesn't have to be bad forever. There are things that you can do get out. Yes. Does inflation make it harder? Sure, it does. But it doesn't mean it's impossible. And I get, for some people, there are some issues there. It's going to be some big challenges. I even work with people who have disabilities and on our social security income, and they still have some progress. Is it the same as someone who's making a normal income from a career or middle income? No, but they're still doing better than what they were. It's just going to take them longer because obviously they have different income, so the opportunities are out there. I think we just are in this society right now where everything is like nobody can get ahead. And we're not seeing that here at Debt Free Dad of those people who are willing to take some action and put in some work.
What do you think is the uh, first thing people should be doing? Like, so they're listening to this podcast, they're really loving what you're sharing with us, and they're like, okay, man, like, what do I need to do first?
Yeah. I think from just some tasks that you could do, just some, more on like, let's say to do items. I think one of the first things that you can do is really get a good understanding and have a better relationship with your spending and where your money's going. We shared a statistic recently on our podcast. Upwards of 50% of the millennial generation has no idea what's going on in their bank account. They have no idea what's going in and they have no idea what's going out. And I'm sure that's probably similar in other generations as well. So I think the first thing I would suggest is like, if you're listening to this, what are the one thing you could do right after this that could be really good for you is go back and print out the last 3 to 6 months of your bank statements, your credit card statements, PayPal, Cash App, Venmo, anywhere you're spending money, even if it's cash, start keeping receipts and get a handle as to where your money is going. And Larry, and I've taught this and shared this with so many people over the years, and I have yet to have one person come back to me and say, "Brad, I knew exactly where every penny was going." Usually it's quite the opposite response of, I am sick to my stomach because I can't believe how much we are spending on going out to eat, or how much money I was wasting on subscription services that I'm not using, or how much money we're actually spending on insurance. I need to shop that around. Or, they're really just not paying attention or too close of attention about what's going on. They have no pulse on where their spending is. And for a lot of people, and not everybody, but for a lot of people that we work with, there's money right at their feet to start picking up, to start building more savings, to start actually saving up for future expenses, to start actually making progress and paying down debt. They're just not being really intentional about how they're using it. So for me, if it were me and I'm listening, this is the first thing I'm going to do, because this was me many years ago before I got out of debt. My spending was out of control. I couldn't, I had thousands of credit card debt. I couldn't tell you what that debt even represented. It was just mindless spending. And so a lot of that has continued to happen day after day in your life and adds up pretty quickly. There was a meme going around, and it said, "How do you waste $10,000 a year?" And all it takes is about $28 and some change per day to waste $10,000 a year. So you want to be mindful of every single dollar that you got coming in, because even especially now with inflation and everything, every dollar is so important.
Yeah, it's so important. That is so important. And it's great advice too. It's the stuff that we don't have our eyes on. It's the stuff that like that is the stuff that eats us alive, I think, for sure. So well,
Yeah.
Brad, I really appreciate you coming on, man. I want to make sure that that the audience can connect with you if they want to, that they can find you. What's the best place for them to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find us over at debtfreedad.com. We also have the Debt Free Dad podcast, which we are releasing 2 episodes per week right now, one on a Tuesday, one on a Thursday. We talk about everything finances, whether it be success stories of people that are doing some of the stuff that we're working on, to our own personal journey. We've got 5 hosts on the show. All of us have had our own story and our own kind of experience getting out of debt. We're all in different stages. And Larry, I've got one co host that's a single girl. She started out making $13 an hour doing this, and 5 years later, she's already paid off over $140,000 in debt. And she's on her podcast and talks about this from
What?
her perspective, which is incredible. I know, it's crazy. Now she makes more money now, but she contributes her
Right.
leveling up in her career to getting out of debt, because she's like, I just could never focus on anything. Like, I was in debt, I was stressed, like, but now that she's improving her life, her finances are improving, it gave her motivation, look for different jobs and do different things. And she has continued just to level up in her life. And she's killing it now. She's expected, I think, to be debt free in the next, hopefully, I think next year is what she's looking at. But
That's
it's
amazing.
incredible. So
That
yeah,
is
so
amazing.
you can find us there, or otherwise we have other resources. We got a lot of free workshops on our website, and then we have Roots, which is our membership program, which is where I think the big component that a lot of people missing in their financial lives and their journeys is really just the support and accountability. The American Training of Development did a study on accountability, and they found that if you are someone who is a goal setter and wants to reach goals, you're 95% more likely to achieve those goals if you implement the power of accountability into your life. And most of us are really poor accountability partners to ourselves, right? Especially when it comes to finances. It's easy to fudge the budget, right? But when you got people working with you, it's a little bit, you got to hold your feet to the fire a little bit more. And I think that's what makes the biggest difference for a lot of people in paying off the debt that we see people paying off.
I agree, man. I totally agree. Well, thank you so much for coming on, gents. We're going to have all the links in the show notes that Brad mentioned today. If you head on over to the dadedge.com/Friday 160 for this show. Again, the dadedge.com/Friday 160 for this show. Brad, thank you so much for coming on today, man. This was awesome. And I wish you the best of luck, man. This was really cool. You're doing good work in the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Larry. I appreciate that.
You bet.